Okay, hi folks, John Mark Bantock here with Catalyst Connect. It's a pleasure to be here today to continue our Zoho Thought Leadership series, where we're going to be discussing relevant topics to us in the Zoho implementation world. Today's topic, we're going to be focusing on project management and defining scopes of work, building on our last webinar where we discussed system architecture and business process mapping as a precursor to implementations. I'm very excited to have with me today Kyle Crow of Cloudbakers and Peter Fuller of the Workflow Academy. So guys, welcome, and please take a sec to introduce yourselves and your roles with your firms.
Thanks, John Mark. This is Kyle. Excited to be here today. So I'm the enablement practice lead at Cloudbakers. So I head up the technical aspect of all of our Zoho implementations. Cloudbakers is a Zoho premier partner. We've been doing Zoho, working with Zoho for 8 or 9 years now. I myself have been with Cloudbakers for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was in software consulting in the Salesforce world. So excited to share with you guys some of the best practices around Zoho implementations and project management today.
Kyle betrayed the Salesforce world and strayed over here. We're glad to have you, Kyle. I'm Peter. I'm the Grand Chancellor of the Workflow Academy. I've been doing Zoho implementations for about 4 years. That's kind of where the only place to cut your teeth and really learn Zoho is implementing it. And now we still do a lot of implementation work, and we're kind of getting into education. So we're trying to codify everything we've learned and turn it into educational resources for Zoho developers, implementers, partners. And I see some of my students on the attendees. Happy to have everyone. And yeah, excited to do this.
Fantastic, guys. So the format for today's webinar, we're going to do a quick recap of our discussions last time on really setting ourselves up for success through setting the right expectations internally and externally with the clients. We'll then talk about how we need to set up our teams and our companies to have successful implementations. We're going to touch on the different types of projects and the resources necessary to really execute those projects efficiently. We'll dive into some of the project management methodologies, how we're going to set up and organize and execute those deliverables, and then of course the tools and resources that are going to help us get there. So to that end, last time we really chatted about the need to understand a client's business before we go and implement Zoho. This really begins with doing a business process analysis, understanding their firm, their direction, their pain points and objectives, and exactly what they want to prioritize as part of the implementation. So we discussed setting up a good workflow and bringing a meeting of the minds between internal and external teams as to what the process is going to look like. We chatted a little bit about doing some workflow process mapping, diagramming out exactly what the user flows are going to look like, and then a little bit about the high-level data architecture and how we're going to be bringing in the different apps in the ecosystem, how we're going to configure the modules and those data relationships. We then chatted a little bit about how we're going to set up the project plan so that we understand the user stories and exactly what the clients want out of the system. So now, segueing from this project plan, we really need to discuss how we set up our teams and take on the right projects to ensure success. Of course, at the end of the day, good project management equates to good communication, organization, and resource allocation. So these are some of the things that we're going to really discuss today, is how do we set up our organization to facilitate good organization, communication, and resource allocation. The first thing that we've noticed over the years is that there's a big difference between implementation and support. And oftentimes implementation leads to support, but the team and the resources and the way you structure your company ends up being very different in leading an implementation project versus responding to and supporting existing clients post-implementation. So let's just discuss a little bit here about the difference between the need to do implementation versus support. typically what we found is that to have a company focus on implementation, you typically have known expectations. You have that initial needs list, the pain points, the objectives that the client wants to knock out. You need to have a project manager who can really organize and help keep the project on track to meet those objectives and those deliverables. We have known budgets and timelines, and you're typically hunting for new business. These are new folks into the system, and you have turnover. This allows you to obviously focus on license generation, and you can build a larger network of companies that you've supported. On the flip side, if we head over to support, we typically are in a farming type environment. We have our known ecosystem of clients. We're not turning over new folks all the time. You tend to have account managers, not project managers. They're relationship focused. We are there to respond to ad hoc needs that may be on demand, they may be urgent, and they tend to be retainer based. So it adds some comfort in having some known support hours there and some budgets to help support that business. And what we found is that in the early days, we could very easily do this with a very small team and a small client base, having the same team do the implementation and support. And as we grew, we very quickly realized that we needed to carve off a separate department to service those support tickets, be responsive, and not be distracted from the stricter timelines of an implementation project. And you have to be able to balance resources between having those deliverables and timelines for implementation, while also having the capacity to respond to more urgent needs that come up with existing clients. So I'd like to open it up to Kyle and Peter. In your guys' experience, how have you been able to strike this balance between creating capacity for new implementation work while also having the bandwidth to support your existing clients and build a good brand reputation in doing so?
Sure, I can take that. Can you guys hear me okay?
Just fine.
Yes, perfect.
Awesome. So I think it kind of goes back to that first slide, John Mark, where you talked about good project management is good communication and organization. So trying to balance both implementation and support on those implementation projects. Those are really the drivers of our business. And we try to really align on expectations when we begin any project implementation. So going through a timeline and how many hours we are expecting to allocate towards it over the course of however many weeks it may take to implement. That'll give us an understanding of how much resources we have to dedicate to the project on my implementation team. And then we can help us understand how much leftover time we may have for certain developers or certain consultants to work on support. So we have a good understanding of how much support will come in on any given week. It can vary between what clients have issues or need help. But let's say on average we have 50 hours a week of support. We can try to find that 50 hours amongst our implementation team to best support our existing client base that do have, they're live on Zoho and they have some existing support needs on any given basis.
Fantastic. So I'd imagine then a good portion of your implementation scoping is that handoff and how you're going to equip a client to effectively manage that system upon go live. Do you want to perhaps touch on your focus in that go live process and migration and ensuring that the clients are equipped to hit the ground running so that you don't have a number of other support inquiries coming 1 week after go live? Yeah,
that's definitely the most stressful part of probably any software implementation, but certainly a CRM implementation or any other Zoho app. Because you're kind of just gearing up towards this go live for a number of weeks, maybe even months, and there's a lot of pressure and stress for our clients to adopt a new system, but we want to do our best to prepare them for a seamless transition. So we really stress user acceptance testing for a number of weeks, double entry potentially, depending on the system, just to try to weed out any potential user feedback questions or concerns in the weeks prior to the go live. So what that looks like is a group, anywhere from 2 to 10 test users in the system, just to start getting their hands on Zoho, getting into the weeds and start using the system, so that when we move the full user base over to Zoho on that go live day and that go live week, we have as little go live support as needed. Of course, there's always going to be some issues here and there, but trying to minimize the stress of that go live week really helps us to stay on schedule and to make sure we're balancing those hours between implementation and support effectively.
Yeah, very well said. And Peter, I'm sure that you have your experience in as well. I'd love to hear from you how you mitigate a phase one just blending straight into a phase two, and how do you handle that difference between implementation and support and keeping scopes refined?
So you don't literally have to raise your hand if the following applies to you, or if you ever experienced this, but you do an implementation, you get a client to a certain point, they're happy, and then there's this never-ending support, just months and months and months of them having asinine little stupid problems and feature requests that either A, should have been handled at the beginning, right? You should have covered them in the beginning. B, are so simple, it's like reset my password, or hey, Peter, I can't log into my leads module, it's broken. And it's like, well, you're using a broken link, or you bookmarked the wrong port, or whatever. That, in my experience, especially for the smaller consultancies, that's like your death knell, is when you're spending when you're spending the owner's time or a top consultant and architect's time on handling, I keep saying the word asinine, that's what it is, like these tiny little stupid requests. They will eat up your life and destroy your business if you let that be all that you work with. If you let the support consume your business as a Zoho consultancy, you will cease to grow and you will hate your life. That's where I found myself probably 2 years ago, is just sitting on all the dumb little requests. So that is, that's again, raise your hand if you felt that way. Chime in chat, ask a question. Like I think even, Cloudbakers and Catalyst Connect are bigger than I am. I have had the fortune to grow enough that I don't have to handle a lot of that stuff. I do have a support team, but it's viscerally seared into my brain when my phone would just ring with just dumb A clients being like, hey, Peter, my projects is broken. I'm really mad. Like, what's going on? So yeah, I'll open it up to you guys, but ping it back to you if you felt that.
Yeah, so I think that's a perfect segue into kind of this next slide here, where we chat about the types of projects, and I noticed two themes pop up there. Kyle, you really stressed user acceptance testing and having a good period where clients are in and operating in the system before a go live. And that way you can flush out all of those problematic broken links and not understanding the flow before a go live. And Peter, conversely, you've started to shift your business more towards training because you understand the importance of users being able to operate the system themselves. And I think that's a very important component for every implementation, is focusing on making sure the clients are independent. And that kind of brings us to this, which is the landscape of these implementations and the approach that we take. And in chatting with our team, we're discussing, well, what makes good project management? And at the end of the day, your effective project management really begins with appropriate planning upfront, understanding the expectations, setting up your teams the right way, and very importantly, making sure that you're taking on the right business. And if we look at the types of projects that we get in the Zoho world, you have these, big monster multi-app new to Zoho implementations. These potentially take months, if not a year, to deploy, train, get the user acceptance testing. Then you have those clients that want I want to use it better. They may have used Zoho for a little while. They may be pretty embedded in their apps, but they may be using it in the wrong way. They may have just used CRM and now want to branch out to, campaigns and projects, or do a finance migration. Of course, then you have those clients that are pretty much settled in Zoho, perhaps operating quite well, but they just need a new functional feature implemented alongside the existing work. And then, of course, you have those clients that are focused on training. It's a very simple use case, and they just want a better prescribed format for understanding how to use the software. And then, of course, you have the API integrations. So we've kind of profiled our types of projects into these 5 buckets. And then we look at marrying that against who is this client? So not only what are their needs, but who are they as a company? You know, what is their culture? What are their expectations? What resources do they have internally? And what are their expectations for timeline and budget? Because that really needs to have a good close fit with your own internal resources, capacity, expertise, and culture fit. And you'll hear me chat a lot about culture because I really want to get excited about chatting with my clients and you know, have a good time being able to brainstorm and get creative and really solve problems and enjoy doing that with them. And we take a look at the type of project, what the client's expectations are, where our capacities are, and then that really dictates our approach. And one of the hardest things that I've had to learn over the years is how to say no. And man, in the early days, it was yes to everything because any business was good business, you know, when you need it. And that can be very problematic when it comes to growth. And I want to stress the importance of being able to know upfront how you want to set up your company and exactly what types of projects you want to take on to effectively scale. And know when to run away from a client and when to refer it out and have a good network of other partners that you can refer work out to. And then, you know, some projects you may be able to have a very strict scope of work and have a strict waterfall type project management methodology to it. Others are going to have to be agile. And with those agile projects, you're going to have to build in some wiggle room, and you're going to know that there are going to be additional asks and, you know, some initial budget overruns. And then, of course, you have those clients that are the marriage clients. These are the unique projects where you implement something that's so fantastic, but so custom that you're really the only one that can help support that long term. And you've got to be very careful about who you choose to get into those marriages with to make sure that it is a really good culture fit. So this is one of the important pieces that we've started to really stress over the last 2 years, which has been quite transformative in the creating the room to take on the right types of clients, and the clients that we have much more fulfilling engagements with. So opening up to you guys, how do you profile your projects and your clients so that you are bringing in the right type of work as a precursor to a successful project engagement?
Before I talk about how we do it, I want, again, I feel like I have this like PTSD of being in a position where I didn't feel like I could do that. And I feel like it's important to note that if your business is not in such a position that you can pick which projects you're taking, if your cash flow isn't where it needs to be to make payroll or to make your spouse not want to kill you for doing the stupid Zoho thing, or if you feel like, hey, you just need to take on more projects because you have a house payment to make, whatever, like if you're not in a position that you can turn away certain clients or pick and choose what you want to do, you end up like me, where I took on 3 full NetSuite migrations, having only ever run the Zoho Finance Suite for my own service-based business. And these were like serialized 10,000 SKUs, 30 warehouse, crazy migrations, right? And that's, spoiler alert, I did it super well and they're super happy. And now I know just crap ton about the Zoho Finance Suite and NetSuite migrations, but I should have realistically turned those projects away. But I wasn't, I had not coached, set my business up for success. I was living just like in the moment of just taking what came along, and I didn't have the luxury to say no. If you are not in a position like that right now, that is, in my mind, the only goal that you should have, is get your business to a point where you can start saying yes or no, and start essentially quoting and scoping more advantageous contracts and projects to you. If you don't, you will always be on the endless hamster wheel of Zoho partner mediocrity.
Yeah, Peter, that's well said. I think we've all been there. Some of those difficult finance migrations, I still lose sleep over. But even when you get to the point of being able to say yes or no, I think we still find ourselves in situations occasionally where we said yes, and in hindsight maybe we should have said no. So I think it's trying to set the right expectations and make sure everybody's on the same page. So even if you have it in writing about what's going to be completed on a certain project, the implementation partner and the client might have a different understanding of that. So kind of going back, John, Mark, to these different types of projects, I would agree. These are kind of the 5 buckets we see too. Where it gets difficult is a lot of projects involve a little bit of each of these from time to time. So really trying to understand what success looks like for our clients is how we kind of set these up. So maybe they're already on CRM, but they want to use it better, but then they also want to implement Zoho Desk all the way from scratch. They don't have any type of service tool now. So it's going kind of milestone by milestone and asking our clients what success looks like for them to make sure we can deliver that before we even start. And kind of going back to the yes or no thing, maybe there's 80% of the project we feel very confident in delivering on, but there's one application or one big piece of this that we don't feel is the right fit, and we do have to kind of stand our ground and saying, we want to, and we would love to implement 80% of this for you, but this one piece, we don't think that's the right fit.
Yeah, and I think that being upfront about your confidence level on different aspects is hugely important, and that's something that we point out now in our project plans is, what do we have a lock on, and what is going to be fairly easy to do. Those pieces that are iffy, where the scope is ambiguous, or it's a new API integration where we don't know what kind of support we're going to get from a third party, we typically try to carve those pieces out into a separate scope of work. Get a lock on your MVP. What is it that we can knock out of the park and really have a smooth phase 1, and then push the ambiguous pieces to a subsequent phase? Because I think we've all been there, where you end up having the scope creep, and the scope creep gets into these more ambiguous pieces that then just end up being this blending run-on type engagement, where you're constantly trying to iterate or fix something that was new or ambiguous to start out with. And we've learned that we really need to try and keep things as refined as possible, with an MVP focus on their definition of a win up front. Because as clients get into Zoho and learn more about what it can do, there's so many ideas that fly around to, oh, well, let's just implement this. And it's so tempting to take that extra couple hours to, dip into that rabbit hole. But ultimately, it really complicates that phase 1, and can lead to timeline overruns and budget overruns, and those little hours here or there add up. So our big focus is really making sure that we are cognizant of what is this project that we're taking on, what are the client expectations, and coming up with a plan of the entire customer lifecycle. Is this going to be a one and done custom function and we're never going to hear from them again? Or is this going to be a client that's going to want us to implement and then have a dedicated resource, for 5-10 hours a week for the next year to be their point person? And we've run both scenarios, and both are okay. But you need to understand the implications of that upfront and plan for it, because the last thing you want to do is get into a situation where your company is set up to be able to turn over implementations, and then all of a sudden you have half of your team stuck on dedicated projects for the next year. where that may not fit with your strategy.
Yeah, I want to take 1 second and hammer in what you mentioned about your project plans, John Mark. You guys do it better. So for those that aren't familiar, project plan, I call them discovery phase scopes. Like there's lots of terms for it. Zoho development is so expansive. There are so many apps that can be brought to bear, and there are so like and the apps can fit almost every nook and cranny of a business, that you need to take a paid portion at the outset to really outline what's going to what are you going to be creating in the end, and what is going to be the focus. That has to be paid, and that also has to there should always be an element there of, we can agree to shake hands at the end of this and say, okay, actually, after learning more about what exactly you wanted, we're not a good fit. Go take this scope that I just built you to Upwork, or go take it to another Zoho partner. I have a few recommendations. That's, in my experience, most partners, including 2019 and before, Peter, were so trigger happy about, oh yeah, a new client. Oh yeah, you need a CRM implementation. Oh, you want Zoho Desk? Yeah, we can do that. We can easily build that together. Oh wait, we got into discovery, and you decided that you wanted to bolt Zoho Projects into this and Zoho Vault. Oh, you were under the impression that Zoho Projects had its own like workflow automation module to trigger emails to different stakeholders, like whenever we wanted. Oh, now we need to build like a complex Zoho Flow architecture with webhooks on projects tasks, and the Zoho Flow support team doesn't get back to you for months, and everything breaks, and everyone's, that's if you escalate the commitment up to 100 on like the first couple sales calls, and then you're like, yeah, we'll do a paid discovery phase, but it's really just a formality, you get yourself into situations that are going to end up sucking. Get paid. I don't care. Give them a discount if they demand it on the initial kind of project scope. Do 10 hours, make a quick buck of money, and then realize if you're going to hate that client and if you're going to hate that project, and make sure the client's aware that you saying yes to the discovery phase doesn't mean you say yes to everything.
Yeah. So takeaways here, I think, is really understand your strategic approach to how you want to grow your practice. Know what you know and what you don't know. Understand what you're good at and where you need to bring in other partners to come in and take over certain pieces. And then set those expectations with clients. Otherwise, we are all going to be in the situation where it's impossible to support a 45 plus app Zoho ecosystem, and client expectations for our expertise to be at the same level on every app. You really need to make sure that you refine what it is that you do, and have a stopping point for that phase one engagement, where you can call it a win, and either transition that client out to another partner, or equip them with the resources to manage the environment themselves. So that really leads into the summary here of the takeaways with profiling one's clients. Make sure that you understand their expectations, the need to do those initial engagements to understand their full scope is very important, so you don't have scope creep in phase ones. You're on the same page. Again, making sure that there's a good culture fit. You want your team to be excited to meet with clients. There's nothing worse than getting off of a stressful client call and just being down. You're not going to perform well the rest of the day, and you really want to make sure that you are matching your team's personalities and expertise with the project well, so that they come away from that meeting or that project energized and ready to tackle the next one. The other kind of key things that you want to have here is make sure you have that parachute, and that parachute may be just a more refined MVP in phase one, where you're not locked into a 100-hour engagement. Maybe it is a 25-hour initial engagement that you can test the waters and make sure everyone is a good fit. I cannot stress enough the importance of having good backups and using the sandbox. And I know we had some questions here in the chat about, how do you approach projects where they're in an app, but you're building on a ton of extra functionality, and or you need to perhaps tweak a process that is already in use and they can't have any downtime. And I think I'd like to take a sec to chat a little bit about having these parachutes where you're limiting scope, you're getting some easy iterative wins without launching yourself into a 6 or 12-month engagement unless you're prepared for it. And having those backups so that if things go wrong, and believe me, they will go wrong at some point, that you are able to restore or be able to flip the switch and go back to where they were. So to that end, in setting up your projects, some of the key things that we like to do is make sure that we're not disrupting operations as it stands today. That may mean actually building a parallel Zoho system. If this is going to be a complete overhaul, we may just start a new Zoho one account and build things clean, especially if we're changing processes in a big way. It can be very difficult to leverage Sandbox to make those changes. So, there's certainly use cases where Sandbox can be very helpful for, functions or features that are plugging into a fairly standard architecture. But if you're changing the architecture of the apps and the workflows, you may need to have a parallel system so you can do that full, thorough user acceptance testing before you push it live. And yeah, it's going to suck to deal with the migration, but ultimately, kind of going back to the theme at the beginning, getting that user acceptance testing, getting everyone on board to know what it is they're getting into, will ultimately make things a lot smoother. So our checklist is good backups, understanding how we're going to manage this change management. How does the client respond to change management, so we know how to approach a new implementation, a sandbox feature, how we're going to have the backups that if something went wrong, we would restore it, and having good expectations up front. So if you guys were to kind of pick a top 3 checklist, if you will, of what you do in setting up your projects to have that parachute, or to make sure that you have a safety net, what are they?
Sure, I can take this. I think the second and third ones are the 2 that jump out to me most here. Obviously, budget is incredibly important. A lot of our projects, our clients can't really afford to go over a budget, and on a time and material project, that puts everybody in a bit of a sticky situation. So what we like to do is try to understand the client goals on a project. What do they want to get out of Zoho at the end of the day? And we try to build out different options. So it kind of goes back to your parachute point, John Mark, but we usually have a number of different ways we can go about solving a client use case. And ideally, we're able to implement the best case scenario, but sometimes things take longer than they should. We run into hurdles and complexities, and we don't have time to build out the best case scenario. So we like to have options and present these options to our client. And if they do need to stay within their budget, we have an option to stay within the budget and still accomplish kind of their use case within Zoho. And then on the third point here, assign client deliverables up front. We approach this a little bit differently. We like to understand our clients' staffing capabilities up front. We see a very high correlation on our project success with our client involvement, but not all of our clients have 10 to 20 hours a week to devote to the Zoho implementation. Ideally they do, but some of our clients are just too busy. So if we can understand how much work they're willing to do, we can assign them some of the low-hanging fruit, some of the very simple, maybe module configuration, and we can walk them through that, maybe even building out some workflows, just to kind of get that, to build their self-reliance on the tool. We see a very high success level if our clients are able to kind of agree on their deliverables up front.
Yeah.
I think
go ahead, John Mark.
Sorry, Peter, what I wanted to, something that really spoke to me was their involvement in the project. And we found that you have to have a point person, that de facto system administrator who's going to know and understand what's being implemented and why it's being implemented and how each feature or function or app supports a specific requirement that was part of that original project plan. And we found that in having someone that's clued into not only the how it works, but the why it works, really makes for a far more successful relationship, because they can understand the implications of the changes that they're requesting, and they can know what kind of ripple effects and work it's going to cause. And it goes back again to making sure that clients can operate and understand the systems well themselves, quarterback that change management, and be able to operate independently. So sorry to cut you off there, Peter, but that one.
No, you and I, we have Vulcan mind melded and honed in on the same point that Kyle made, that the level of client involvement should be a go or no go decision to you at the kind of in the discovery phase of how much you want to work with that client and whether you want to take the job. In my experience, the micromanagey CEO who's like, hey, I need this done and it needs to be this. And then you're like, okay, can I show you how maybe you could save some money and invest more in your system for you to like hide the modules and fields you don't want? And they're like, I'm not paying you, like I'm paying you guys to do that level of high tier expert customization. And it's like, oh my gosh, like this would take you 45 minutes, help you better understand the system. And if you're not willing to invest in that, I'm going to be real, people. I don't know if you're experiencing this. There's an immense amount of demand for Zoho services. Maybe it would be different if we were like I don't know, booking horse and buggy appointments or something where there's no demand, right? There's a lot of demand for what we do. If you are not, again, if you are not in a position to say no to people that appear to be either micromanaging, not going to actually invest in the system themselves, or they're gonna jilt you and scope creep you and nickel and dime every last hour, work to get your business in a position. Maybe it means doing some outbound sales instead of just waiting for inbound stuff. Get yourself in a position that you can get better clients and better contracts and hire people. If not, welcome to mediocrityville. I keep harping on this. I don't know if this is useful, but I'm venting the frustrations of a scorned 2019 Peter watching his business just be trash.
Yeah, I think that it comes down to profiling one's client and the project and knowing what the approach is going to be, because there is a way to manage the client well if they are going to be that micromanager that is going to want to dominate the conversations, and you're going to need to do some personality profiling on the people that you're working with. So not only on the company and what their objectives are, but the people. And we've found that we're in the people business. We are working with people, and sometimes your team's ability to connect with your clients at a human level and have a good relationship counts for more than your technical expertise to be able to do backflips in the Zoho ecosystem. A lot of the clients that are the most satisfied have the simplest systems, and they're willing to pay for just a good sounding board and someone to guide them through and make sure that they are using the standard features well. Yes. So I think a big part of this is matching your team to the client, understanding the personality of your client, when you need to let them take charge and when you need to push back and really impart your experience and knowledge and say, no, do you know what? I completely understand where you're coming from. But perhaps you consider this, and maybe give a user story of why your approach may be better for their situation. But I think that you need to have a good framework for how to guide this implementation, but be flexible to respond to those unique variables of the client's needs, the budget, the timeline, the personality profiles, the new things are going to come up halfway through the project. But you have to have that path, that road to follow. And to that end, the way that we set things up is when we do the project plans, we set it up in more of an agile project management environment where we have a user story, this business objective. Yeah, I want to be able to bring in leads, qualify them well, and get them into my sales floor with the right person to begin selling. So we'll usually break up a functional component of a business process. We'll call it that, lead intake and qualification. That in and of itself will become a work order in a project. And yes, there will be a defined objective. We want to be able to bring in leads from our website, from chat, from social media. And we know that we're going to, based on product X, Y, and Z, route those leads to, department ABC. And so we can set up some defined objectives or scope of work as a guidance. But then once you get into the actual implementation and you get the stakeholder involved in actually testing that workflow, then you're going to come up with the nuances. Well, wait, actually, if they come in with product interest X, but they happen to be in California, we actually need that to go to this other person because, he was here at the beginning and he gets that product as well in his territory, right? All of those little nuances that don't get flushed out at the beginning that can throw things off, we treat as child tasks to that work order. So you need to be able to set up expectations up front that, we have this deliverable, we know the general direction that we're going to implement that function or feature or process. And we have our initial scope of work to get us, say, 80% of the way there. As we start to get the user involved in actually testing the workflows and seeing how it's going to work with real data, and that's important. You need to be able to have some test records under real world circumstances so that they get those gotcha type conditions. Then we start to have our child tasks to go through this iterative process, and we make sure to budget for that upfront. So we tell clients an estimated hours upfront of, well, this is how we would, you've given us this business scenario. This is how we're going to solve it with XYZ Zoho apps. These are the features that you're going to use, and it's going to take approximately 8 to 12 hours to do this piece. Here are the pieces that we know are rock solid. You've given us our field list. We know what the drop-down pick list values are and how to set up our layout rules, but we don't know what we don't know. And in our experience, we know that there's usually 4 hours of miscellaneous conditions that we need to build in here. So when we give our budgets, we'll give a low-end budget for that piece, and we'll carve out a certain number of flex hours of anticipated changes or enhancements that are going to come down the line. And that way it's budgeted for upfront. The client doesn't get a surprise when you have to take the 2 extra hours to build something custom to handle that unique one-off circumstance. And handling it that way, where we have the overall job with an overall budget where the client says, I cannot go above 25 grand. And we have 5 grand focused on the lead qualification process. We may want to then say we have a hard lock on 2,500. There's no way that we can do your minimum ask for less than this. We want to carve off an extra $2,500 of work to handle the miscellaneous pieces that come up, but we're really going to focus on this first objective. And we try to, it's very difficult to say no, and you don't want to say no, but we've got in the habit of saying, yes, that is great, we'll add it to a phase 2 list. And that way we can really make sure that we are keeping their budget on track. There'll always be problems that will pop up where you're going to need to dip into extra budget. And we try to keep that refined list so that we can get the early win. And then at the end of the project, come back and implement the nice to haves. And that has really kept timelines on track, budgets on track better of course, this is always a work in progress. I cannot say that anything is perfect, but it's really helped create a better framework for managing this, and involving the client in the process helps them understand the implications of the things that they're asking for.
I like that. I just want to ask a quick question to confirm, both you and Kyle. You guys bill a not insubstantial amount for discovery or a project plan, so that the final budget and the final scope can be as close of a good estimate as you think it can be. You're saying, John Mark, like, have a couple hours built in for lead nurturing process testing. The only way you can adequately know what amount of testing you're going to have to quote for is if you've taken the time to get paid to discover and build the project plan, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, we our discoveries range anywhere from, you know, probably 20 hours of work to more than 100 hours of work. And, you know, keep in mind that we're doing projects that on the small end will be less than $5,000, and our largest projects are, you know, close to 300 grand. So there's a very big difference in the breadth of work of the types of projects that we're implementing. But we try to always give the customer a very high level estimate up front, give them an idea of and an example or two of how you can take the same process, call it sending a proposal through, you know, Zoho Sign. Today, out of the box, within 2 hours, we can take your templated contract and, you know, with 5 clicks, we can send that contract out to the customer. Some clients are going to be just fine with that. Others are going to say, wait, you mean I have to hop from this screen to that screen and then, you know, fill out this manually? And they're going to say, no, I want to be able to click one button and have this contract go out to the point person on the deal. And we can say,
I want a GIF of the Queen of England appended, a different one for each year, appended to the resultant PDF. Yeah.
Well, you say that kind of jokingly, but you know, just this last week, I had a customer that wanted a barcode embedded on a document that's sent through Zoho Sign. Yep. And, you know, we've done that. You know, we've gone out and created a QR code with Google's API, brought that back as a file image, and then embedded it in a custom PDF that gets sent out. It's all doable, but of course, that's not a 2-hour project. That's going to be a 25-hour or
3-hour project. Agreed.
And so at the very outset of discussing a deliverable, we try to introduce this variability that, you know what, we can absolutely get that objective done in 5 clicks, and it's going to take 2 hours of work. But if you want it in 1 click and you want all of these automated things to happen, it's going to be closer to 20 hours. And we try to set that expectation up front so that they say, well, do you know what, I'm happy to live with a little bit more of a manual process for the phase 1. Or they'll say, do you know what, I know that my team will never use this unless it is fully automated. And that's where you guys have to come up with that that balancing act of saying, okay, well, you know, that's fine, we can do that in a phase 1. Just know that, you know, that's what the budget's going to need to be. So upfront, we charge for that because there's no ways that you can get into the nuance of, you know, what their actual expectations are for each feature. Everyone's coming from different apps and different ecosystems, and Infusionsoft has a great, easy process for being able to send a proposal through the CRM and get it paid, you know, right then and there with the payment gateway integrated. That client is coming into Zoho with the expectation that that is out of the box, but yeah, obviously that's not the reality. So
it is, isn't it, John Mark? There's a Zoho Zoho CRM integration. It's easy.
So, you know, it's really taking the time to go through the expectations of exactly what they want out of that feature, and then giving them those options of, well, you know, here's the MVP version, here's the, you know, nice to have version, and then here's the all the bells and whistles. And how I think that this kind of speaks to your guys is almost good, better, best of, you know, what's going to be 100% solid within your budget, or, you know, what are the nice to haves that you may want to sprinkle the fairy dust on it, you know, to make it more automated.
Yep. And the one point I'll add here, to Peter's point, we try to get a paid discovery up front so we can properly scope any type of project or task. But it's not binary, especially for some of these really large projects like a data migration or an API integration. We are continually reviewing our estimate and our actual work to it internally on a weekly basis. And if we realize that we did underscope it, we try to bring that to the client as early as possible. If we had budgeted 100 hours and it's looking like it's going to take 125 or 150, it's a lot better to tell the client that when you're at the 25 or 50 hour mark as opposed to the 100-hour mark.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, yeah, once again, kind of perfect transition to that change management. Changes are going to happen. Expectations are going to change. Business needs are going to change. And I cannot stress enough the importance of having open, honest, and regular communication and having that full transparency. Do you know what? The problem is there. It's not going to go away. The best thing that you can do is hit it head on, be upfront and honest, and take responsibility where responsibility is due. If there was an oversight through your team in scoping something out, maybe you are going to have to take the knock and give some free hours to make up for it. Those free hours, in our experience, have paid dividends, tenfold over. The brand loyalty that you build, the honesty in being upfront, really just it leads to so much more work and better acceptance of your recommendations further on, because you are giving the good, bad, and the ugly all up front. You're in it together, and it's a partnership. So when we talk about change management, a big focus of ours is delivering a win, and delivering that win on the MVP, making sure that when there are changes that we're communicating them, or problems, we're communicating them regularly and upfront, and we're documenting those changes through scope of work approvals. It's always that you're going to have problems in that fringe case where you didn't get something documented. And good rule of thumb is just make sure you have a standard process to accept those scope of work changes, whether it's an email, whether it's a formal sign-off, a recorded video, whatever it may be. You want to have that documented so that if problems occur, you can point back and say, do you know what? I understand, this is difficult and you're frustrated, but, we discussed this, here's what we all agreed on. And hopefully if you get those scope of work approvals, you're never in that situation. But if you do get into that situation, you have the documentation to back it up. And we're going to be having a webinar specifically on the legal side of our engagements in June. So make sure to look out for that, where we'll discuss how to set up your contracts and your scopes of work to protect yourself in cases where things don't go really well. So do you guys have anything to add here in terms of change management, and any words of caution or key takeaways on your end?
No, are we gonna open it up to Q&A, or where are we
Yeah,
at?
what I'd like to touch on just quickly is summarizing this client engagement. Now, we've talked a lot about having client engagement from the very beginning and having their buy-in and approval and user acceptance testing as really an integral part of good project management and a successful implementation. We've built out a really slick portal for our clients that we use as a central place to manage projects with them. So projects will get deployed to their portal. Any new scope of work adjustments get pushed through as a quote where they can sign it through the portal, and those changes get added to the work orders. So our project screen, we have the project overview. If it's a support type engagement, we'll actually show their retainer balance on here, what tasks are outstanding, we'll have our work orders for our user stories or certain processes that we're tackling, and then our task management underneath that. And having a good dashboard to really speak to have everyone know what it is we're working on, what the statuses are, what are the new tasks that have popped up, where the budget stands, and we actually give full transparency into every time log in our system. Everything reflects here, so the client can see, the scope of work, the objectives, the time spent, by person on each task, how that rolls up into invoices, where their balances stand, and our inquiries into invoices went down 80–90%. Not that we had that many to begin with, but we maybe only get 5 people a month really questioning an invoice, because everything's here in the portal for them. They know what we worked on. They've already approved the hours. If we need additional hours, we go through a scope of work change, then there's clear expectations of what the implications of those changes are going to be. And if they need the detail of the invoice, well, it's already there for them live. And that's really helped, again, build a better relationship with clients and having that transparency. So maybe we can take just a quick sec to ask you guys, how do you involve clients in the project and keep them up to speed as to what's going on?
Kyle,
sure. So
I'm embarrassed.
No, to Peter's point, we don't have a portal built out as fluidly as this, but I think it all goes back to the original point, which is communication. So our information that's displayed on this portal is segmented into a few different spots right now, but making sure the client knows how they can access that. It is available on demand. I think that's a big thing in today's world, so that a client can get the budget information, the task information, the timeline information whenever they want, and it is up to date. So we use a lot of Google Sheets, some other project management tools for our clients to be able to see all of that. And then we, to the transparency point, we make sure we bring it up in all of our weekly syncs. If we are over budget or there's maybe some tension there, we try to address it up front and just get that out in the open, because it is not going away at any point.
Yeah, absolutely. So to that end, if you guys don't know, we have a fantastic customer portal that is available for WordPress that ties into the whole Zoho ecosystem. So if you'd like to deploy a customer portal of your own, we're happy to provide a partner license to any Zoho partner. So you can certainly request that partner license over here. And be happy to help you guys get set up with that comprehensive customer portal. So why don't we go ahead and open it up to questions. We have a few minutes left here before the top of the hour. So to the audience, is there anything that you'd like us to weigh in on?
I think that everyone's just still sitting in like this state of shock and awe at the amount of knowledge that we transferred in 54 minutes.
I think that we obviously covered a lot. We'd love to dive into some other areas. So if you guys wouldn't mind giving us some feedback, if you'd like us to drill into, have a follow-up to drill into any particular component of what we discussed. I see some questions here of folks asking, how exactly do we govern change management? How do you approach change management in a system where users are already operating in Zoho? These are very difficult things to answer because they vary from case to case. And I think that to touch on the change management within an existing system, really making sure that you have an effective plan and that you communicate changes not only to your point people, but to the stakeholders that are using that system is very important. When it comes to the use of Sandbox, I think that can be a great tool. Just be careful. We've had clients that have reset the sandbox as much as the big red button says your work will be lost. we've had, 25 hours of work lost, and client not wanting to pay for it to get restored. We've also done 5 months of development, really complex changes in the sandbox over 5 months, with hundreds of items needing to be pushed, and that can be very problematic. The sandbox, I think, is very good for small iterative types of changes, but when you're doing big overhauls to processes, that's when you're really going to need to potentially look at building a sister system that you would be able to build out all of your workflows, get the user acceptance testing, and then deal with the migration, because we've run into big issues with hundreds of changes needing to be pushed. It becomes quite complicated to do so. So I think with that, we're getting to the top of the hour here. Really appreciate everyone's time, and hopefully you got a nugget or two from today's session. If you have any questions for any of the panelists, please feel free to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn if you don't have our direct emails. Happy to help answer questions, discuss how we can have better synergies as a partner community. A big theme today was choosing the right types of projects, knowing what you do well and focusing on it. And the best thing that we can do as a community here is make sure that we understand each other's expertise and bring each other in on deals. And that's going to make for a far more efficient and effective environment for everyone. So with that, thanks Carlo and Peter for joining me today. It was a pleasure having you guys, and look forward to the next webinar.